Hi everybody, welcome back. Let's look at Ultrabeat and Logic Pro. Ultrabeat is a 25 voice drum synth and pattern sequencer that works like an actual analog drum machine. For example, this Roland 808. This is all analog. In this particular case, this is all from the 1980s, this Roland 808. And to many people, this is second to none in terms of sound quality. But as far as this Roland 808, of course, many things, it's very, very expensive. As time's gone on, of course, they've got, some crackles in them, obviously within the outputs. It's not necessarily perfect. And if you do find a perfect one, it could be upwards of $4,000 or $5,000. So one of the things that I love about Logic is that it has Ultrabeat that runs much like this particular drum sequencer. In Ultrabeat, the drum voices 1 through 24 are assigned to the first 24 MIDI keys, C1 to B2. The 25th drum voice is assigned to the 25th MIDI key above, so it can be played chromatically. Let me show you what that looks like here. So the first 25, in this case, are your drums, and then your bass sounds are going to be 25 and up. So the first 24, of course, are populated within drums. 25th is going to be your chromatic bass lines, if that's what you decide to do. So keep on going. As far as Ultrabeat is concerned, there are 3 sections. You have the assignment section. The left side of Ultrabeat's where you select, mix, assign drum sounds. You have the synthesizer section where you design the selected drum sound, also where you place the samples when changing instrument sounds or samples, and the step sequencer. That's the bottom the section of the Ultrabeat where you create drum patterns for the selected drum and control sequencer, and you're controlling the sequencer. Each voice in Ultrabeat has its own step sequencer, and all 25 sequences are combined to make a drum pattern. Up to 32 steps per pattern are available, and they can have resolutions of between an 1/8 note and a 32nd note. So before we get delved into it, just remember the interaction between the length and resolution of the steps in the sequencer needs some review. When we sequence a length of 32 steps with a resolution of 1/16, we have a total of 32 16th notes, making a 2-bar pattern. Changing the resolution to 1/8 notes gives a 4-bar pattern, and so on. So one of the things I like to look at too is that as you see the instrument itself, you'll be able to see at the top of Ultrabeat, you have voice and auto select. Turning on the voice lets you select the drum voices within your MIDI controller, and that comes in very, very handy. Quickly you can audition sounds as you're creating what you're creating. You can also import sounds, and that's also at the top, and I'll show you that here in a minute, as well as MIDI controller assignments, which many of us like to have our mod wheel and our pitch bend. So let's look at very quickly what we're looking at as far as Ultrabeat. So I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to look at a very simple software instrument. And so the software instrument I've called up, of course, is Ultrabeat. And in this particular case, I'm using the same chord pattern that you had created. So I've got the chord change, and it's also the chord change where I'm utilizing the arpeggiation. So what I want to do is try to create a drum beat within that chord change that we've created so that it works seamlessly and perfectly. And with that, you should find that it's very, very easy to do. So with this Ultrabeat setup, let's just kind of very quickly look at where we found it. Ultrabeat is within the software instrument, so let's just go ahead and populate the track with Ultrabeat. And what I've got here then is just a very simple kit. And I grabbed this kit based on a preset. And you can find your presets here up on the top. When you first get started, you're going to find that your kit or your drum kit won't have anything. So let me just open up one for you so you can kind of see what it will look like before you have anything. So this is Ultrabeat and what it would look like before we do anything to it. So here's our instance of Ultrabeat with no sounds. And as you can see here, they're all sine waves, nothing to it. And we can audition that. I'm just going to solo that out real quick. So how do we get sounds inside? Well, like I was just showing you, we can come up here and we can populate a drum kit. And when we populate that drum kit, like I was telling you, it comes with some sequences inside it. So the one that I picked here is just this down tempo kit. And as you can see, the sequence here on the bottom. will play through, and they've given us a lot of this stuff. And as I go through here, each individual instrument, as I'm just kind of highlighting each one starting from bottom to top, I can see that, for example, this 12-bit rim here has nothing inside it, and if I wanted to put something in it, I could. Let's listen to what happens as I'm playing this through. You'll be able to see all of the sounds as they're rolling through within the MIDI information, and all of the MIDI information is being programmed here. So, for example, if I wanted to just only see this kit, and going back to the notes, looking at the left-hand side, this is our assignment section. And that assignment section allows us to be able to obviously audition the sound. If I wanted to turn it up or down, I could. So I've got my velocities. In this case, you see this little line. On top of that, I've got my mute and or solo. And I can pan. That's off to the left here. Or off to the right. And then I'll just put it, because that's the kick drum, I'll center that as best as we can here. And then we have our output section that I'll talk about here in a minute. But as we look at this, you're going to see it's very, very powerful, because one of the ways that I want to show you how we can program is using this as a mixer. So if I only want to hear the kick drum, I'm going to simply solo out the kick drum, and let's just populate a 4 on the floor in this particular case. And you can see the velocity levels and the gate are very similar to our arpeggiator. So if I wanted to tighten up the kick, I could, obviously. Or if I wanted the kick to last a little longer, I could make that open up just a touch too. Also, if I wanted to turn up the kick or down, it's exactly like the arpeggiator in the grid section. So I'm just opening up the kick here, so we get a nice open kick drum by opening up our gate. See there? Now, let's say, for example, you wanted to pick a snare sound. Well, we can go through here and we can audition these sounds. And in this case, let's just say we like that snare sound. Obviously, I'm highlighted on that wood kick, so that's corresponding to what I'm programming. But if I wanted to program the wood snare, let's just highlight the wood snare. And you can see there that I've already had some information within that side. But if I wanted to, I could just go back and I could reprogram that. And what I like to do is watch this little scribe roll through, because it kind of tells me where I want certain things at certain times. So I note watching it. Now I just want a little flange at the end there. Or, right. Let's go back up and let's look at a closed hi-hat now. And in this case, you can see that they've populated a little bit for us, and they've got these little tiny picks there. But if we wanted to, we could make our own, of course, which I think is probably wise. Let's see what we've got. So you can see here now, I've got 3 tracks making the beat that we've got in this particular case. Now, just imagine then if I wanted to take those 3 tracks and then utilize them inside our MIDI information, it's really this simple. If you look down here on the bottom, you can see pattern. So now what I want to do is I want to take that pattern, I'm going to grab that box, I'm going to put that inside, and I'm going to now be playing back exactly these 3 sounds that we've just programmed: the wood kick, the wood snare, and the closed hi-hat within that MIDI information. And you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of extra stuff inside that, because that's what was within that sequence. But of course, it's muted out, so if we wanted it gone, we could just simply delete it. It's all MIDI information. or we could leave it because we've got the mixer telling us that we don't want it, and maybe later on if we decide that we do want it, we can open that back up in the mixer. But very quickly, I've just separated out those 3 MIDI tracks, and you can see that they're all right there for us. And so, of course, a little bit later on, I'll give you some ideas on how we can separate this out. But that's very quickly kind of looking at what we can do in order to get that particular track in. It's really, really quite simple. And so those 3 sounds essentially, and being able to program them in is very, very easy to do. Another thing that I might like to do, let's say for example, is I don't like this particular wood snare. So maybe potentially we might want to change that out. And this is where I love looking at the synthesizer section here. And so as you can see, I've got access to the sample section. Now the wood snare that I've picked, you can see is populated there. And the sample, you can see the waveform, no problem. If I wanted to, I could reverse that, which could be kind of fun for some. But what we want to talk about in this particular exercise is maybe potentially uploading something a little bit better. Maybe you have a better snare sound, or one of your friends has something from their keyboard or something like that. We want to load that sample in so we're not using Logic's built-in. One of the reasons why I love this versus some of the others, for example, Avid's, Boom, for example, I'm not able to load sounds that I want. And a lot of the drum machines, I'm not able to load, exactly the tones that I want. They have to, come from the actual machine. And in this particular case, it can be anything that you want, which is why some of the biggest names in the business, like Dr. Dre, love Ultrabeat. So what I'm going to do is go to my desktop, and I'm just going to look here at the 808 that I just showed you. And we took that 808 and we grabbed every single sound that that 808 will make. One of the things that we love about that 808 is not just the bass sounds, but they also have some really nice snare sounds. And so in this case, I'm just going to open up this beautiful snare. And now as you'll see, I've got that 808 snare here. And so what I've done then again is I've just clicked this little triangle up on the top, I've loaded the sample, and I loaded that 808 snare from the desktop. Now the only other thing that I need to do in order to make that work is to go back over to my sample, hit Control, click, and initialize the sample. So one more time, go back, hit Control, click, and initialize my sample. Now, the snare, that wood snare that they had, is no longer. Now I'm using this beautiful 808 snare drum straight from that 808 that you just saw in the lecture. Isn't that nice? And to review, of course, I could do that to any of these sounds if I wanted to, but of course I just changed out the snare sound, no problem. So very quickly, load the sample on any sample that you want. Let's say, for example, you wanted to change the hi-hat. Let's just load that sample. We can come in here to maybe some of these hi-hat tones. Not that. There we go. Let's open that up. Now you can see here we have that little closed hat. I'm going to hit Control on that area, Control click, initialize the sample, and now I should have a really nice hi-hat pattern as well. So again, new sounds coming from the snare, coming from the hi-hat, new sounds coming from the snare and the hi-hat, and then of course leaving that kick drum the way that they had it. And if I wanted to, I can bring anything else that I want to in the world. It can be anything. So let's go back to our track. Hopefully that is a lot of fun for you, and for some of you, really get you going as far as quickly being able to program with Ultrabeat, being able to do anything that you want to with it. No limitations, of course, right? So I'm going to go back to our arpeggiation that we had talked about, right? Now, the only thing that I changed on the arpeggiation from the last video is I just added the chord steps on 7, 12, and 15. It's the only thing that I changed, is I added those chord steps. But let's go back now to Ultrabeat, and let's figure out how we can customize that beat inside. And so in this particular case then, I just have exactly the same thing that we had before. I called the downtempo kit up, and what I did was I created my own sequence. I created my own sequence here within the pattern area. So if you look down on the pattern area, All of these are different sequences that they'll give us, 1 through 10. Those are what, they're custom built basically, but they're still preset in. Now, 11 is one that I built. That was the one that I'm going to show you here in this example. As you see here, 12 through 24, we're looking at all clear. There's nothing there. So if you wanted to, you could make your own. And in this sense, then once you're done, basically just save it, and then it'll be your own sequence. And so in this particular case, the sequence that I created was sequence number 11. And the main aspect of sequence number 11 in this is that I've got my wood kick, and that wood kick is just simply doing a 4 on the floor. Another aspect of what I did, of course, and as you can see here, that I changed the snare, and I initialized the sample on the snare. So very quickly, I just went to the BLA sample, right, and I loaded that sample, and then I control-clicked and initialized the sample. So now I have access to that 808 snare. And let's just solo that out. Nothing to it, right? Now let's go back. I added a little bit of this clap sound. So you'll see there, just, simple hit. To just add, a little extra every once in a while. So hopefully that adds a little bit for us. And then I've got this little closed hi-hat here. And that closed hi-hat, the very randomized pattern. And then, as you can see here, using the velocity levels. So being able to go up or down on those levels basically now in this case, right? And that should create some dynamics in that. So it kind of gives us that element of somebody playing it. Let's see what we got there. Now the last thing that I did was I've got a very simple open hi-hat. So let's just have that guy set. And the open hi-hat is just going to kind of be, if you don't have the closed hi-hat with it, it reacts in a very different way, but you'll hear the difference. So there's really not much to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different drum sounds in order to make the pattern that we made. The wood kick, as you can see here, is just 4 on the floor. Every quarter note. In this case, our snare drum is every other, right? Our clap, same idea. Closed hi-hat. I kind of randomized the pattern just a little bit, so that it can kind of sound a little more hip-hop. And then the open hi-hat, nothing to it. Getting that open hi-hat to work with the closed hat. Now, there's a lot that we could do with this. Remember, we could pan this off if we wanted to. There's a lot of mixing things that we could put within this, but it's very simple, right? These 5 sounds. Now, in order to get those 5 sounds inside, what do we have to do? Just simply take this pattern box and drag it in. And now we'll be able to take that pattern and utilize that pattern within our sequence. As you can see there, that's the MIDI information that we've just created. And so very quickly, everything that we've just programmed, if we wanted to, we could go over here to full view down in the bottom right-hand corner, and I can see everything here. So let's say, for example, on one of the hi-hat parts or something like that, we didn't like it, I could take it out or add it or whatever I want. But very quickly, I could see all of the programming I could get to it. I know a lot of people that like to use this view much more than the other view. This, just makes a lot more sense to them. And with that, it's totally up and totally up to you and how you like to work. So in that sense, this is going to be, the view of where we could see exactly how we're programming in. We could change our resolution if we decide that we wanted to. Obviously, we can get to our mixer view. But if we go back to our full view, you can see I've got access to a lot there as well, right? The only difference is that now I can actually program within this grid. And so I think having the synthesizer section, maybe potentially once you're done with that, going back to the full view might be the good way to go, because you can see you're not missing this information on either view. I hope that helps. So Now we've got those 5 tracks in. I'm just going to take that instance of what we've got and put those together. And one other thing that we want to do is just remember that this is acting like an actual drum machine. So we need to shut that drum machine off. And so as you can see here, it's running. And you see how it's turned on. We won't need to have this turned on anymore because now we're running this within our sequence, right? And so if it is turned on, you're going to hear kind of like a phasing sound. You'll hear it here. So let's lose that sequence, and I'm just going to take that away, and we're going to shut the sequencer off so that we're not playing what's live in this particular case as well as what we have here within our MIDI. So we don't need the drum machine anymore, of course, and then we should have a nice little sequence. And then, of course, noticing that your MIDI information is exactly the way that you're used to seeing it. So if you wanted to, we could go back to it and we could reprogram any of these things that you've got set. But Ultrabeat in itself is being able to create a really wonderful groove. If you wanted to, we could even go one step further, and we could even change the swing patterns if we wanted. You see here? And as you studied within the rhythmic theory, being able to set your swing pattern, being able to go just a little bit off the grid could be exactly what you're looking for in order to create a groove. So Ultrabeat, I think, is going to be a wonderful tool for you. So before we get too far in this case, we want to talk about what we could do in order to separate these drums out. There are several ways to look at this. And so one of the ways that we could do this very quickly is we could just simply bounce the region, right? So if I was to come up here to Ultrabeat then, and I've got these 5 instances, if I was to just simply highlight the kick drum and then bounce that region, that might be a really wonderful way to go. So very quickly then I could just simply have my 4-on-the-floor kick pattern. Now remembering that we're done programming, everything is set and we're happy with it, let's just bounce our kick. And now as you see here on the bottom, now I've got this kick pattern all set and ready to go. And then we can do all of our analog tricks. Obviously in that sense, the only difference, of course, is that if we wanted to utilize MIDI, we'd have to go back to our MIDI information. But as you can see here, I didn't lose it. Now, in order to get it back, we just simply have to unmute it. And so now I've got that unmuted and I'm good to go. And so very quickly then, let's just say we wanted to get our snare sound. I've got my snare soloed in this particular case. I've highlighted the snare only, soloed the snare only, so when we play it back, of course, it's only going to be the snare. Let's bounce that down. As you can see here, when I'm bouncing the region, for those that haven't bounced before, I'm going to create the destination as the new track. We'll call this snare. I'm going to mute the source, and then with that include audio tail and include volume, pan, and automation if we have that inside. Hit OK, and now I should have my snare drum underneath. So now, very quickly, within 2 seconds, I've got my kick and snare. And let's just keep going. Get back to our MIDI information. I can hit Control, click, and then now I've got my MIDI back. And let me just do a couple more here. We've got our closed hat. I'm just going to finish on this closed hat. Solo that closed hat out. And let's bounce that region now. And now I've got my closed hat, my kick. And of course, for those that remember within the analog lectures, if I'm not happy with the waveform, the way that the waveform came out, of course, you can see that it's there, but I want it a little bit bigger. What could I do? I could just come over here to my gain input, and then I'm just going to click here to the left. I'm going to click that up a little bit so I can see it just a bit better. And now I should have a little bit better control. But as you can see here now, I don't need MIDI, do I? I could shut the MIDI information off. As you can see here, it's, I'm going to mute it as it's not needed. I've got my hi-hat pattern, and if I wanted to, I could pan it off to one side. I've got my kick drum perfectly. If I wanted to, I can compress that differently or EQ that differently, and the same thing with my snare. very quickly. And it's all MIDI. So going back to it, I can just very simply just change it if I wanted to. It's not gone, right? But if I lose this information and delete the MIDI information, then we do have a problem. So let's just go back here and let's just delete these through the analog tracks that we've created. Now, what's another way that we could actually separate these tracks out? Well, it's actually very, very simple. What happens if I take the instance of the MIDI information that I've just created and I just copy and paste that? In this case, you see here where it's at a double plus. I'm going to create 5 instances of the same information, right? Because we have 5 sounds. Now, let's go back to our MIDI information, and I'm going to just copy this through. Now, of course, that's not going to work yet until we start going through our controls. So what do we need to do? Well, the first instance of Ultrabeat, we want to make sure that it is only the kick drum. The second instance of Ultrabeat, we want to make sure that that is only the snare. The third instance of Ultrabeat, we'll make sure that that's only the clap that we've created, right? The fourth instance, and you get the idea, is going to be that closed hi-hat. And the fifth instance in this case then is going to be let's just do this guy, that open hat. There you go. Now, I have all of these sounds. Now, of course, we've got to make sure that we shut the sequencer off. I think that we did, but I always like to go through and just to make sure. Sometimes they'll stay on, but as you can see here, what I'm looking for is to make sure that these are shut off. Because if they're on, the sequence will play through when you don't want it to play through, of course, and that happens quite often. For those that have worked with Ultrabeat, you know what I'm talking about. But everything looks pretty good. Now we should have everything set. And of course, I've got my kick drum, solo. I've got my snare, separated out and soloed. Clap separated out. Hi-hat. And how nice, because you still have all of the MIDI information there. And of course, if you've got the computer processing for it, you're not too worried about having multiple tracks like this. And a lot of people like to work this way as well. But as you can see, I'm using, for the case of speed, I'm using this mixer and I'm soloing out the mixer. And then I'm, obviously using one in order to create everything that we create. And then I can separate it out very quickly. And again, I'm just doing that here up on the top, duplicating it so that it's copying every parameter of what we've got there. So hopefully that helps. And in this case, that duplication function is wonderful. So I think that's, as far as separation in this particular case, probably as far as we want to go. I just simply have one more aspect that we'd want to look at. And that is maybe potentially if you want multiple outputs in a different way. And so in this case, what I've called up then is Ultrabeat. And as you're going to see here, Ultrabeat has access to multi-output. And so in this case, this particular kit, I've called up the multi-output in order to get what we've got here. And so another way that we could separate drums out, and we'll end here essentially, is using that multi-out. And so it's no different. You've got all the sounds that you had in order to create what you created here, right? But the difference now is that we're going to come here to our output and we're going to change the way we're coming out. And as you can see, that it has a very different way of coming out in terms of our routing. So let's look at this real quick then. To get to our mixer, if we hit Command 2, I can see my mixer now, and looking at this little guy, you can see it has a little plus there on my instrument. This is the Ultrabeat instance, right? So if I hit plus then, this is going to be 3 and 4. I'll hit plus again, 5 and 6, I'll hit plus again, 7 and 8. So if you look at the wood kick now, instead of being sub 1, I want that wood kick to be on 3 and 4. Now the kit is going to be soloed out through this 3 and 4 here, right? Now on top of that, if I wanted to, I can now look at my snare drum sound, and I could do the same thing. I want the snare to come through 5 and 6. I'll do the same idea. Right? And on. So I could do the clap in this case. The clap could be 7 and 8. And on and on. Go back to the hi-hat. In this case, the hi-hat, we've already done 7 and 8, so we'd have to do 9 and 10. As you can see here, we don't have 9 and 10, so we just hit plus again. Now I've got my 9 and 10 there, and now I've got my hi-hat routed perfectly, right? Now the one thing that I'm pointing out, though, is that they're not actually in the edit window as we're playing that through. This is giving us the option to being able to mix it, but I show you the other options first because I think that it's nice to being able to see the actual edit, and that's just my opinion, of course, but hopefully that helps. Many different ways to look at Ultrabeat and Logic Pro, but as you can see, Logic is set up very, very similar to our quintessential 808 drum machine, and it's a big part of why I love it so much. This is very, very similar to the way that I've been working as a kid, so hopefully you like it. Like I said, if you have any questions as far as Ultrabeat is concerned, please let us know. Let me know if you have any questions. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, guys.